Hello, this is Matthew Pfeiffer. Thank you for joining Toxic to Triumph. I'm very excited about my new guest, about the guest that I have today. Her name is Lori Wheeler. If you're on TikTok, I'm sure you're very familiar with her, especially if you are someone who tends to overthink or have any sort of obsessive thinking. Lori is an alternative therapist, and she runs the URL positivityexperience.com. But you can find her on TikTok. I know you're on Instagram. You're pretty much all over social media. Is that right?
Oh, yes. I'm all over social media. You can find me on Twitter, Snapchat. If it's been invented, I'm on it.
All right, perfect. And so thank you for joining us today. And tell us a little bit more about what does it mean to be an alternative therapist and how did you actually get into it?
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I appreciate you so much and I appreciate all you do. So I want to first say that.
Thank you
Now,
very
from
much.
being absolutely. So for being an alternative therapist, let's talk about how I got there. So first of all, what an alternative therapist is think of traditional therapy. It is mindful cognitive behavioral therapy, typically what you would see with a traditional therapist, but I also add an energy element to it. So I do a lot of Reiki work. I do a lot of grounding work. Mindfulness is a big thing, staying present, making sure that you are aware that the time and space that you have is only right now. It's not yesterday. It wasn't tomorrow. So how did I get here? Well, my story is not one of a silver spoon in my mouth, which is honestly how I think a lot of therapists and coaches like yourself, I think we get here because we've gone through stuff. We
For
don't
sure.
just wake up one day and say, you know what? I mean, some people do, but there's always typically a reason. So for me, I was born to much older parents. My dad was 49, my mom was 44, but she was sick a lot of my life. And so she passed 9 days before my 14th birthday.
Wow.
My dad, and you can relate to this, my dad was a narcissist. And he was also an alcoholic, and he also had bipolar. But in the 80s, it wasn't like that was a very common thing, to be like,
Right.
oh, this is what you have. And, we fell upon, dad got involved with certain people, and we ended up staying in a van for a while. And it became this thing where I started to feel really bad. And I started having anxiety attacks, honestly, before mom ever passed. And I didn't know what they were. And I was told I was crazy. I was told, just get over it. On top of everything, I have ADD. And, you're wrong. And you're all of these things. So after a while, you start believing those things. After a while, you start believing those things. And when you're believing those things, you start feeling like you can't do anything good. You can't do things right. You start to take on what you feel that everybody is saying about you as being factual. So I went through having really severe anxiety attacks. And then at 19, I had this kind of heart catheter thing that goes up and they shock your heart to see if I had a heart issue. And
Hmm.
they're like, no, it's based on stress. And I went through the whole woe is me thing, feeling really bad, feeling like the world owed me something, angry all the time. And for those of you who don't know, anger is not a true emotion. It comes from three places. It comes from frustration, fear, or hurt. And I had all of them. And I started going to therapy because I figured, and the funny thing about that is mental health has a really bad stigma. Or
Yes, it
not so
does.
much, yeah, it does,
Especially back then, right?
especially.
Now, things are a little bit different where, because of social media and because of creators like yourself, because of creators like me who are making it to where it, especially, I love TikTok so much because of the trends, right? And so now, not only are you making it more popular, but you're making it um, not only accessible, but trendy, right? And so nowadays, and of course, there's still a stigma, right? And but things are changing. But definitely back when you were talking about in the 80s, there's definitely a stigma, and it's interesting that you said that people were convincing you that you were crazy with a narcissistic parent, because obviously that's, like you said, that's something that I deal with. And one of the things I love about TikTok and other platforms is that people are able to see that it's not them, that they are not the crazy ones. So when you were going through this, I'm sure you felt very isolated at the time, that you were the only one going through this, and your entire world at the time, your father, I'm sure there were other people around that were that were spinning this narrative, that were creating this narrative, and you really couldn't even see your way out of this, so to speak. How did you get to a point where you realized that it really wasn't you and it was really just your environment?
Well, and it's funny that you mentioned other people. Most people were they sort of alienated us because of my dad's behaviors. So I was the receiving end of people thinking that, well, hey, that's your dad, and your dad, we don't like how he does things, so we're going to ostracize you too. So I got to the point where I was in some dark times, and I did the whole drinking thing,
Hmm.
heavy drinking, partying. Hey, I mean, typical things, but
Right.
almost to an excess. And I realized that that wasn't helping me either. And then finally I said, something's got to give. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go to therapy. And I did. And I didn't know how to respond to it because I didn't know what to say. I felt like I was being judged. And I think that's a lot of reason why people don't go to therapy is they feel a fear of being judged. And so finally, but I felt better. And I thought,
Yeah.
not better. It wasn't like one session and it was done. Please. I've been through years and years and years of therapy. And along the way, I said, you know what? I like this and I want to do this, but I want to do this in my way. Like I want
Right.
to do this in a way that becomes relatable because along the way, I'm very spiritually inclined. I wouldn't say religious, but I'm
Hmm.
spiritual. So I'm the person who gets out in the moon and goes naked under the moon and it's like, oh my gosh, let me just embrace this. And it was about staying in the mindful moment. And with a lot of work on myself,
Right.
it led me to saying, you know what? I need people to know they're not crazy. Well, we're all a little crazy, which makes us happy.
Right.
But we're not crazy and that they're not alone. And for me, honestly, by helping others, I learned something from them too. Every client that I have, they're not broken. Every
Right.
client that I see, I learn something from them. And so I feel like that's how I ended up where I am today. And I'm just going to continuously grow and just see what help people need. And as much as I can, let them know that they're not alone. And that's how I ended up here.
You say that you learn things from from your clients. Like, what would you say the biggest takeaway would have been from one of your clients?
Oh, well, gosh, I have clients from all different walks of life and different things that they go through. Um, I would say a lot of things that is a commonality that I feel that I get from them is their fear of being vulnerable. Okay. And knowing that that struggle that they have is always going to be a trigger for me because
Right.
I too didn't want to feel vulnerable.
Hmm.
So while it's a trigger to me, I know how to process it more. And I think I learn from them and I go, oh my gosh, aha moment.
Hmm.
And you go through those, man, if I would have known then what I know now, like your parents would say, and then you turn into
Hmm.
your parents, you're like, how the hell did I get here?
Yep.
Um, but kind of that's what, but I learned something different all the time. And I would say one of the biggest common themes, and I have clients all over the world. I talk globally to my clients all over the world, and it
Right.
doesn't matter what location that they're in. It always comes back. It's kind of like overthinking and obsessive thinking.
Hmm.
It always comes back to a root cause.
Hmm.
And so there's that commonality. I don't care what nationality you are. I don't care where you live. I don't care age. It's always going to come back to something that is the root. And then
Right.
people are afraid to address the root, just like I was.
Speaking of overthinking, that's something that overthinking and obsessive thinking, that's something that both you and I deal with. Typically, when I'm dealing with it with someone, they're dealing with ruminating thoughts, in particular when they have left someone who's narcissistic. We know, just like you were talking about that root, we know that it's from the trauma bond. People who followed my content know that that trauma bond really is an addiction. It's the same part of the brain that deals with addiction, that sort of thing. Can you go into a little bit more about overthinking, obsessive thinking, ruminating thoughts, in particular when it comes to relationships or anything that you might see that is very common in your practice as well?
Absolutely. Thanks. So with obsessive thinking, I want to differentiate. Overthinking, we're all going to do that. If I wear this shirt, do I like how it looks on me? I don't know. Should I wear a different shirt? That's normal, typical stuff. That's overthinking. Obsessive thinking itself is where it starts to debilitate you. It's where you start getting caught in a loop, what I call a mental loop, what a lot of people call a mental loop. And so what happens is when you're ruminating, so let's be clear, rumination is typically always linked to past behavior And that's also linked to a version of depression. And it can be dysthymia, which is your low grade kind of long-term depression, or just depression in general, where overthinking.
Could it be, when we talk about depression, could it also be a part, because we know that depression is a part of the grief cycle. Could it be a part of that depression as well?
It can, and it typically can also get caught up in like a little bit of obsessive thinking, which is OCD. It's always going to be linked to an OCD type component. But when you're obsessing, overthinking of things that haven't happened yet, what if this happens? You've played out scenarios in your head on the future. That is always linked to anxiety.
Okay.
100% linked to anxiety. So now, can you have both? Absolutely. Depression and anxiety are happily married. They're a happily married couple that's never going to get a divorce. You can have a stronger lean towards one and not the other. So when you're obsessive thinking, let's go with your example of relationships, and the trauma bond that you spoke of, that we're all familiar with, that we all honestly have to something. We all have a trauma bond. So when you're obsessive thinking about it, it's going, man, why didn't I get out of that situation earlier? I should have gotten out of that. Why didn't I get out of that? Oh, well, you know what? If I would have said this could have happened. But it's not just a passing thought. It's a thought that goes on loop. And now you've created scenarios. Now your blood pressure might be rising. Now you're creating anxiety. Now you're doing that. So it's this overall cycle, especially when it comes to relationships. And what I always recommend for people in relationships, and this is, I think, a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people, is you have to have a friendship in a relationship.
Right.
In all relationships, friendships are a relationship. Any way you spin it, it's a relationship.
Right.
So creating and knowing what you deserve in that. And when you haven't done that, that's when you typically go, okay, well, gosh, this person stepped out on me. Was I not good enough? I don't think I was good. Like, I did everything I should have done. So you get caught in this loop when you realize the deeper issue isn't so much that the person stepped out on you, right? So this is how, because people always want to know, great, love it. I'm an obsessive thinker. I want to stop it.
Right.
Okay, newsflash, not going to happen. I mean, seriously, it's just not going to happen. You don't just, if that's the case, you and I would be on an island somewhere that I own doing this podcast, right? Because that's not a thing. So when you're obsessive thinking, number one, it's being kind to yourself, going, okay, I am thinking about this. Why am I letting this disturb my life? What is the deeper issue it's bringing up? In a cheating aspect, it's always going to be about it's not just the act itself, because that's going to be understandably disruptive.
Right.
Also, what does it say about you? You feel like maybe you put your life on hold. Maybe you do everything for this person. That is because your boundaries were not there.
Right.
And when you don't have the boundaries, then you automatically feel as though you could have done something different. It's always going to be you. But that's always contributed to a deeper root. Could it be because, excuse me, could it be because mom said, hey, you can't do this correctly? Is it because people make you feel a certain way? So then you start getting in this loop. And the only way to sort of address that loop and quote unquote fix it or snap out of it is to understand, number one, you're not going to snap out of it. You need to be very, very, very aware of that. And then say, okay, number one, I'm not staying mindful, because you're thinking so much about yesterday. You're thinking so much about today. And it's also about understanding that you have to have a level of acceptance. That's a bitter pill for people to swallow. It has happened. It's not invalidating you. I'm a person who's always going to validate your feelings, but I need you to know that it's happened. And what hasn't happened, you don't get to play out when everybody else has their own free will. So you can play out a scenario of how you think a situation should be going forward. But if it's just you in the situation, fine. But when you're dealing with other people in the situation, you don't get to dictate how they're responding to you. And a lot of times in overthinking and obsessive thinking, it'll be, why isn't this person doing things the way I would do them? And the reality is that's because they're different than you.
That acceptance piece is huge. I talk about that all the time. Radical acceptance, just accepting things, accepting life on life's terms. Right? It may not be what you thought things should be in the moment, but accepting life on life's terms. And you brought up something that I didn't mean to cut you off, but you brought up mindfulness, which another thing that I talk about quite often, right? And first of all, what is mindfulness, and how does it play out into obsessive thinking, anxiety, depression, like just in life in general?
Okay, now you're talking my language.
Right. Uh-huh.
Now we're getting to the heart
Uh-huh.
of Lori. Okay, so mindfulness, and as a person who does mindful cognitive behavioral therapy, that's like a huge part of what alternative therapy
Hmm.
is. So, what is mindfulness? Let's talk about it. Mindfulness is being aware um, of everything that you're doing. So, we've all been to there where you're watching TV and you're eating and you've gotten to the end of it. You don't even really know what you ate. You didn't really experience it. You're drinking your coffee. You're just drinking it out of repetitiveness. You're just kind of doing, you're not being. So,
Hmm.
mindfulness itself is being in that moment. So, if I'm, for example, as we're speaking, I'm going to put on my chapstick. As I'm putting on my chapstick, it's not just about making my lips not chapped. It's about feeling the feeling, staying in that second, drinking the water, feeling how cold it is, tasting the coffee, biting into your food and slowly chewing it, feeling the textures, tasting the taste. Do you feel salt? Do you taste salt? Do you taste sugar? What do you taste? Tasting it, being mindful of your actions. When you're going to walk, when you're going to run, if you're doing exercise, being in that moment, feeling the pedal strokes on your Peloton, feeling the ground hitting the ground. So that's mindfulness, is being aware. Listen, we've all been there where you're driving
Hmm.
and you just take that normal route and you left the store and you got home and you think, oh my gosh, I
Where
don't
was
even know
I?
what's getting here. You
Right.
know what I mean? And
Hmm.
that's because you're not being mindful.
Right.
It's a
Not being
practice.
present.
You're not being present, which is
Hmm.
what it is. Mindfulness is presence.
Right.
And it sounds easy, but it isn't if you're not trained to do that, because we get so caught up and we're in this world where everything needs instant gratification, has to be about tomorrow, has to be about yesterday. This needs to be done. This needs to be done. It's about pause. And that's really what mindfulness is.
When
And
you talk
that's
about pause, what does that look like? I know, for a lot of people, I'm surprised to when I talk to people and they're not very familiar with meditation. It's one thing to have never practiced meditation or someone to never practice something like journaling.
mhm.
But when we talk about the practice of mindfulness, what does that look like for you? What do you encourage the people that you work with to do in terms of mindfulness? How do you initiate a practice of mindfulness, and like what's mindfulness 101 when someone is looking to just get started?
Okay, good question. So mindfulness 101, let's talk about it, because I don't want to give you too much and then you could be like, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed. And
Right.
then you start overthinking it. And am I doing it correctly? So no. So mindfulness 101 is going to be giving yourself minimum, but starting at 5 minutes a day. This means you set don't say I'm going to think about doing it for 5 minutes. Number one, you hard schedule it for your time. You are just as important as anybody else in your life, if not maybe even a little bit more, because you can't give from an empty cup. It's just not natural. So what happens is you set aside 5 minutes, you schedule it. I don't care how busy you are, everybody has 5 minutes.
Right.
And so you set a timer on your phone for 5 minutes and you just sit. Don't fight the thoughts. Let them come, because I think that's a big misconception. People think that when you're mindful or present or meditation, that you're supposed to just have a clear mind and it's supposed to be whatever. So then it becomes overwhelming and then they just don't do it. So it's about saying, okay, for 5 minutes, I'm just going to sit. No social media, no television, no distractions. Just sit. Just look around. It's fine. If things come up, let them come up. Just acknowledge the thoughts and just stay and focus on one thing. Let's say it's a picture on the wall. Let's say it's a bottle of wine, whatever it is. And just look at it. Look at the texture of the bottle. What color is the bottle? Look at the label. And next thing you know, 5 minutes is going to go by really quick. And that's
Right.
being mindful.
Mhm.
So what that does is it's not meant to stop you from rumination, stop you from forward thinking, but it's about pause. And a lot of times in anxiety, when you're having an anxiety attack, because I specialize with anxiety, when you specialize in anxiety, you learn, first of all, it's about seeing the stop sign,
Right.
visualizing the stop sign being formed, not just being there. It's being formed. Watch it, watch the colors, watch all of that happen, watch the letters being written, do all of that just for 5 minutes. Start there. that is going to be your first sort of step in mindfulness. There's so many other steps. But one thing that I have learned, because I get so excited about it, I want to give everybody all the tools. Here's all the tools.
Right.
Not that's just causing more harm than good.
Right. Right. And when we talk about the practice of mindfulness, like what results can people expect when they begin to grow in this and they begin to practice this on a regular basis? And they, how does this actually impact anxiety? How do you know that it's working?
You start to know that it's working because you start looking forward to that time. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I personally, for myself, like to give myself a minimum of 30 to 45 minutes, minimum. And you start to look forward to that time. And it also starts to make everything else a little bit more copable throughout, because you're like, okay, I realize these things are stressing me out. I realize I'm overwhelmed in all of these things, and I'm overthinking and I'm obsessive thinking. But you know what? I know that tomorrow at 11 o'clock or whatever time that you have it, and literally you have to hard press it. You can't just be like, I'm going to do this tomorrow.
Right.
No, you must make this a ritual. In order to make this a ritual, after 28 days, it becomes a habit. So once you're able to make this a ritual and stick to it, because it's going to seem like at first you're going to be like, well, I'm not feeling anything. Stop looking for instant gratification. You're not going to get it. So know that it's going to be smaller baby steps. So as you start realizing, I kind of like this time. And then you start looking forward to it and you're like, I feel really good. Like I feel like this is my space. Then you know it's working. In turn, you're going to want more. You're going to want more of that feeling. And then you start getting into the, let's do more active meditation. What is an active meditation? Going for a walk with no music, no podcast, no social media. You're going for a walk. And when you're walking, you're looking at the leaves and you're looking at the texture, not just the colors. And you're feeling your feet hit the ground and you're smelling the scents and you're just hearing every cricket. When you do that, that is meditation and that is staying present. So now you've combined two really good practices. It can also lower blood pressure.
Mm-hmm.
It can lower your anxiety levels. It can become an addiction in a healthy way of desiring that feeling. And then you're going to start realizing you'll find yourself over a period of time. This is not because I know everybody's gonna be like, oh my God, I'll do this and it'll be great. No, but over a period of time, you'll start developing kind of the IDGAF attitude towards things that you think are such a big deal. And you'll be like, oh, you know what? No, you just start you come a lot more zen. And
Keep in mind, you're allowed to swear on here. I know a lot of people are going to want to know what IDGAF stands.
Oh, that means I don't give a fuck.
Yep. Okay.
I'm so glad that you said that. So I'm like, how do I keep it PG?
Yeah. So we don't have to be PG. This is not a PG.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah. So just be yourself here.
Oh, thank God. Because I don't want everybody thinking, oh my God, she's so prim and proper. No, I'm a sailor dressed in a woman's clothing.
Yep. Which is part of the reason why you're on this podcast. So
I love it.
Yeah. So be yourself. But I wanted to tie something that you mentioned in with two things that you mentioned. People who say things like, I don't have time, I don't even have 5 minutes. How do boundaries affect you setting aside time for yourself, that sort of thing, and then just kind of go into boundaries? Like, what are they? Like, I guess kind of I always find it very difficult to talk about boundaries because everyone's boundaries are very different, right? And I talk about the fact that boundaries are, the very core foundation is who's responsible for what, right? And if you're going to be responsible for your mindfulness, then that means that that's an actionable item, right? That you can say, like, I'm setting aside this time. There's nothing that anyone can say or do about this. This is my time, right? And I'm going to put this in my schedule, and I'm going to take responsibility for this step. But what would be your definition of boundaries, and how can someone use mindfulness and kind of use that as a way to begin to practice and enable boundaries for themselves?
Okay, another awesome question. So here's the thing. First, let's talk about what a boundary is. People think boundaries are for other people, how to keep other people away. No, boundaries are 100% for you. You're never putting up a boundary and thinking, this boundary is so these people stay away from me.
Right.
No. A boundary is really establishing what it is that you deserve, what it is that you are in deserving of. So this kind of goes hand in hand with the I don't have 5 minutes, I don't have time. No, you don't just you don't think that you deserve that time. Okay. Now that can come from a deep rooted issue of it's selfish to take care of yourself. And FYI, self-care is never selfish,
Right.
ever, ever. And so number one, establishing a boundary, and you're right, boundaries are going to be different for everybody else, everybody individually. However, there's a common theme here. What do you deserve? Now that's going to take some time. Do not think that if you don't know what that is, that you're wrong, that you're broken, that there's something wrong with you. No, not at all. That means great. Cool. Let's start there. So a boundary itself is what do you deserve? And what do you deserve means your time. Your time is valuable. Your time is just as valuable as anybody else's, if not more for yourself. So what you do is you say, okay, if you're spreading yourself too thin at work and at home and giving yourself to everything and you're doing 50 different projects at one time, I mean, that I speak from experience on.
Right.
And it's about creating that boundary for yourself and saying, okay, what is important? For example, setting boundaries for yourself with social media. TikTok, I love TikTok. You love TikTok.
Hmm.
It can be a time suck. You can get on there and it can be unproductive time. It can be a distraction. It can be whatever you call it. So I schedule in my TikTok time. Literally, I say, okay, this is my social media time. This is the time I'm going to make TikToks or YouTubes or whatever, because I have a YouTube channel, anything like that. This is the time I'm going to answer my TikToks or my DMs or my emails. This is the time. You hard schedule that. And realizing that you deserve equal measure in work and play.
Right.
I do not care what you have been told. What you have been told has been somebody else's narrative of what they think you should be doing. That is not your narrative.
Speaking of which, I'm glad you said that because that ties really well into people pleasing. I'm sure you've dealt with it. I'm sure a lot of people that even being a creator on TikTok, a lot of times you can overthink, like you're talking about, or worry about what other people are going to say, what other people are going to do. And a lot of times that can be a part of the overthinking or obsessive thinking is, especially when you have a narcissistic parent or you've had someone that's highly critical in your life growing up, or a highly critical significant other. Um, how, when we talk about boundaries, mindfulness, one of the things that people really struggle with is like this, just people pleasing, and in this finding that balance between trying to find people that really love them for their authentic nature, and just going out of their way trying to make sure that people that are never going to be pleased with them are pleased with them. Yeah, like, what can you speak about that a little bit?
Oh, absolutely, because that goes hand in hand with boundaries.
Yeah. Hmm.
So that goes hand in hand. So here's the thing with people pleasing. Always know people pleasing comes from a deeper rooted issue, meaning that you have value when other people are happy with you. However, this is the hardest part to understand. You have to be okay with you first. You will lose people, by the way. So be very, very clear. This is not me saying that everybody's going to hop on this bandwagon and be like, I'm so happy that you're helping yourself. This is great. No, when people can no longer use you for what they want you to be used for, they don't have any use for you. And then they're going to, this is where the toxic part of people comes in. People who you have cut off, and you don't even realize you cut them off. I don't want you to intentionally cut anybody off. It's about establishing the boundaries for yourself of what you deserve.
Right.
And understanding that your job is to not make people like you. Your job is to not make people feel some kind of way about you, because their narrative of you is going to be their narrative of you. Your job is to not please them. Your job is to establish who you are for yourself. I know this sounds to some people who might not be familiar with it and may feel like, oh my God, that's so selfish. Absolutely not.
No.
Absolutely not. So when you're people pleasing, the main person that you're not pleasing is you. And before you say, I am happy when other people are happy, that is not really a true statement. You do get joy out of seeing that. I will give you that. But you're not happy because it ultimately comes down to you. You're happy, and happy, again, not a true emotion, assortment of emotions. You're happy when people are almost going, oh, man, I like you. That was great. You're getting some validation out of it. You're trying to fill that void that wasn't filled by whatever root cause that is.
Right.
And that's where the boundary of saying, you know what? For example, I see this a lot. Somebody says, hey, you know what? You're my go-to person. Hey, can you, I'm thinking about painting this weekend. Why don't you come over and help me paint? And in your head, you're thinking, oh my God, I would rather walk naked down the street than go paint. However, you say you don't want them to be angry. You don't want them to get butthurt behind it. You don't want them to get pissed at you. So you go, oh, fuck. Okay. Yeah, sounds great. I'll be there with bells on. I can't wait. And then you're like, oh my gosh, why do I keep saying yes to everything? Okay. And then you realize that the person that you're not pleasing is you. It's literally okay to say the word no. And keep in mind, no is a 100% complete sentence. No, period. Not no because, not no and, no, period. And that's where you have to set that boundary.
And that no doesn't mean that you're being mean. A lot of times
Correct.
people think that they're being mean, and it's, you're just protecting your energy, protecting your, setting your boundary, protecting you as an individual. Maybe that's your time that you have set aside for something else, right? And you don't need to explain yourself to anyone. You're under no obligation to explain to people. And I tell people that even though boundaries are not to push people away or anything like that, like you were just describing, but they do help point out the people who are toxic, because the people that are toxic, they're not going to respect the boundary. They're going to want you to explain yourself. They're going to and because with people who are toxic, narcissistic, when you begin to explain yourself, now all of a sudden you're on the defensive, and that looks like you're guilty of something. And then we start getting into emotional blackmail and some of my world. So
Well,
uh,
and it's funny that you bring that up too, because here is the flip side of that. It's also, while you're setting these boundaries for yourself, now this is going to be tough to hear, but you have to realize other people may have boundaries too. And while you're setting your boundaries and you think that people should respond a certain way, that's why I say don't expect you out of people. You have to keep in mind that it's great that you have boundaries and you should 100% set them. But you're going to have to realize that other people are going to have boundaries too. And whether you like them or you don't like them, and you think that they should be doing something a certain way, yes, absolutely. Say what it is that you deserve, say what it is that you need, but you have to understand everybody else has that right too. Everybody else doesn't have to respond to you. It's not your world either.
right.
Okay. So yes, this is about you setting boundaries. This is about you taking time for yourself, 100%. But it's also about you getting a very clear perspective of, yes, you do deserve certain things, but everybody else has their own way of doing things and they can't read your mind. You can't, and just because you voice it and say, these are the things that I need, please keep in mind that if you're going to have a healthy relationship, friendship, anything like that, you have to be willing to listen to the other person too. You don't have to agree with it, but there's a level of compromise. It can't just be about you, because there's times where you don't realize it, but sometimes you are the toxic person.
Right.
Sometimes your thoughts are
Right.
the toxic. So let's keep it real, right? Like, it's great. Like, we're talking about, you and I are talking about, yes, get out of narcissistic relationships, set these boundaries, do all these things, empower yourself, rage, do all of those things. But the other side of that is, it's keeping in mind that sometimes your expectations are your expectations. They're not everybody else's.
Right.
And that's that really weird gray, 50 shades of gray, find one, pick one, stick with it.
Right.
It's not black, it's not white. And that's kind of, that kind
Right.
of leads into your boundaries too.
So that begs the question: how can you tell if you're the toxic one or if the other person is the toxic one? In particular, when someone is being narcissistic, when they're not accepting any responsibility, they don't respect your boundaries. One of the things that people really struggle with when they're dealing with narcissistic and toxic people is this me or is this them? Is this someone I need to start to shed out of my life, or do I need to really reevaluate who I am and what I'm doing?
Ooh, that's a deep question. What are you doing over there? You put me on the
Well,
deep end.
you're just setting me up. I can't
No,
complain.
I'm
You just set
serving
me
you the
up.
ball.
So
That's okay.
yeah,
It's good. It
yep,
keeps my brain fresh.
exactly.
So here's the thing. To some level, and I know this is tough for people to hear, To some level, we all have narcissistic tendencies.
Right.
And I think you would agree with that.
No,
Like,
that's 100% true.
yeah, I mean, we all have
Mhm.
narcissistic tendencies. Keep in mind though, when you're the narcissist, or when you are the person who's the toxic one, that's when you start that's when how I would describe that is if you're the one that is always dictating things. This is how things need to be. This is how I need them to be. This is what it means. I need you to do this. I need you to do that, and you're not willing to compromise.
Right.
That's one way to really say, okay, wait a minute. Uh-oh, maybe this is me. However, if you are finding yourself being compassionate and you're like, okay, you're making these compromises, and this person's making, or you're made to feel that you're the one that's the toxic one,
Mhm.
good chance you're not.
Right.
So how I would differentiate that is say, okay, be a bit. Now, this is where you guys, the listeners, are going to have to take a really good inventory and be very honest with themselves. Again, keep in mind, it's okay to have the ways that you do things. Those are some of the typical traits. All of us are going to have a little bit of narcissism, perfectly fine. But if you find that you're not happy, and you're not happy because people aren't doing the things that you want them to do, you're the one that's going, listen, man, you need to do this. And you're kind of the belittler and not realizing that you're doing this, but you're kind of aware of it. And things need to be done this way and that way. Then it's time to take really good stock and say, all right, maybe I'm the narcissistic one. Maybe I have these toxic traits. And then, okay, great. Now you've acknowledged it. I'm the toxic person. What do you do with that information?
Right.
You seek help. You seek somebody like yourself, myself, other people that do the things that we do. I know that, like, for myself, I don't take insurance. So sometimes people do need the insurance.
Mhm.
That's where I would say I would recommend going through your insurance carrier, find a good therapist, and be willing to get to the heart of the issue.
Right.
Do not think that you can just fix this. Oh, I'm the toxic one. Okay, what do I need to do? All right, I'm gonna take this pill and I'm good. Now, I believe in holistic and pharmaceutical. So I do both in my
Mhm.
practice, and I feel like there's a place for both. And
Right.
but keep in mind that just because you take a magic little happy pill, unless you're getting to the root of the issue, you're not going to address this toxicity. So once you've evaluated and you thought, okay, maybe I could jump ship from this relationship, but I'm just going to get into another relationship and it's not going to ever meet my expectations. And I'm always going to keep up on this trauma sort of venture that I'm on and never being happy. That's where you need the therapy.
Right.
That's where you need the coaching.
Right. Very good. Lori, I could talk to you all day long. I think we're right on the same wavelength, but I do know that you got to go make TikToks as well as I do. So I appreciate you very much for coming on. This is very, very informative. We're definitely 100% going to have to do this again.
Oh, yes.
Do you have any closing thoughts that maybe that weren't able to share? I guess what's one takeaway that you wish that each and every person might have, like something that is kind of your overreaching goal and desire for each person that you work with?
I would say that you need to realize and understand that your feelings are 100% valid. Your perception is your reality. I don't want you to judge it. I want you to realize that just because sometimes you overthink it, you obsessively think about it, or you're made to feel like maybe your thoughts are wrong, maybe your feelings are wrong. If anything, I need you to know that you matter, you're valid, you are important. And even if you have some bumps and bruises and some dings and some work to do, because you should always have work to do through the rest of your life, is to know that you are imperfectly perfect. In turn, that makes you unique and it makes you perfect in yourself.
That was great. Thank you very much, Lori. We will do this again.
Can't wait.
And yeah, and for those of you who are listening, once again, this is Lori Wheeler. You can find her on TikTok. You can find her on Positivity Experience, and that's with an X, not experience, not the normal spelling of experience. She speaks on overthinking, obsessive thinking, anxiety. She's an alternative therapist, and you can find her once again on Positivity Experience, TikTok, and pretty much any social media platform by going to
Lori Wheeler.
looking up Lori Wheeler. So thank you very much, and we all will talk soon.